What the hell? My alpha husband rejects my touch after I made this small petty mistake. Have you ever been in a situation when a seemingly small mistake ended up costing you greatly? It happened to me. I didn't even have any fucking clue that it will turn out to be like this. Trust is very important for any relationship. It takes a lot of effort to build this trust and very little to break it. I made the mistake of breaking it, and I regret that. Till this date. I, female 36, married to my husband, male 40. We have been married for 2 years. My husband is a professor in our local university. I'm an assistant professor in the same university. I joined this university 3 years back. The pay was really good, and the working hours were also less compared to my previous place of work. My husband is a senior professor in this university. He is well respected there. I met my husband in university when I was hired as an assistant professor to work under him. My husband was present during my interviews. I developed an instant crush on him. He was smart and fun. I was over the moon when I was hired to work under him as his assistant. We had to work in close proximity as our work demanded that. I used to attend his classes with him and also corrected test papers after work together. Working together worked in our favor. We used to hang out a lot with each other. One thing led to another and we started going on dates together. Our relationship started with small talks and casual jokes. We soon started having lunch together and spending more and more time with each other. The attraction was mutual, and it wasn't long before we got in a relationship with each other. After being together for a year, my husband asked me to marry him. I liked being with him. He was well respected in the college. He spoke with certain authority. All that had me really falling for him. I loved the way he cared for me. I told him yes, and we got married in a small wedding ceremony. Our married life was going well. I had moved in with him in his small bungalow. We were happy together. Our life was going great. We used to work together and then got to come home together. I was happy and content in my marriage. I felt like I had everything I ever wanted. My husband was the perfect alpha male. He was strong, confident, and charismatic. He knew what he wanted and how to get it. I admired him for his intelligence and hardworking nature. I felt like we were a perfect match, but soon I lost him. A year into our marriage, I made a small mistake that ended up costing me everything. It was a mistake that I didn't even think twice about when I made it, but the consequences that followed were unimaginable. I wish I could rectify that mistake. It all started with a new assistant professor who had joined our university. Let's call him George. George was around the same age as me. George was charming, confident, and, to be honest, very attractive. I had casually talked to him a few times before, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. However, one day, when my husband was out of town and I was working from a cafe near the university, me and George happened to bump into each other. We both ordered coffee and started chatting. The conversation was lighthearted and fun. We discussed everything from work to our personal lives. George was single and had just moved into the town. He was very easy to talk to, and before I knew it, a few hours had passed. We exchanged numbers and promised to keep in touch. I didn't think much of it at the time. I enjoyed talking to George, but I was happily married to my husband. Little did I know my small mistake of exchanging numbers with George would lead to a series of events that would turn my life upside down. Over the course of the next few weeks, George and I started texting each other. Initially, it was just casual conversations about work and our interests. But soon, our conversations became more flirtatious. I couldn't believe it at first. I was pretty sure that everyone was aware that I was married and who my husband was. George started sending me flirty texts messages which were subtle. I could have ignored it if I wanted to, but I didn't. I responded back to him in a flirty way too. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. I would text him only when my husband wasn't around, as I couldn't risk my husband finding this out. I was just having fun with texts. I didn't think I was doing anything very wrong. One day, my husband and I got into a really big fight. He wanted a baby, whereas I told him that I wasn't ready yet. We already had this discussion, and I had told him that I didn't want a baby. Having a baby came with a lot of responsibilities. I didn't think I was at that point of time where I was ready for those responsibilities. I tried to make my husband understand this, but he was too furious to listen. He said some really hurtful words to me. He told me that it was in my nature to run away from responsibilities. It made me very upset and sad. He left the house to get some space from me. I was home alone. The fight left me feeling upset and vulnerable. And that's when George messaged me, asking if I wanted to grab a drink with him. I hesitated, but the temptation was too strong, so I agreed to meet him. My husband needed his space away from me, so it was fine that I was taking my space too. I thought to myself as I texted George that I was down for meeting that night. We went to a bar far away from the university. It was on the outskirts of the town, so there were slim chances that I would run into someone who would recognize me there. The bar had an amazing atmosphere. The dim lights and soft music set the perfect mood for a night out. The drinks were flowing, and the conversation was light and fun. But then things started to get a little out of hand. I got very drunk that night. I ordered multiple shots of vodka. George was by my side throughout the night. We were flirting with each other continuously. It started to feel like we were the only two people in the world. I forgot about my fight with my husband. It was nice to be away from the stress of my marriage for a while. The chemistry between me and George was undeniable, and it was unlike anything I had ever felt before. That night, I cheated on my husband. George came out to drop me to my cab. We stood there and waited for my cab to come. We were waiting on the pavement when he kissed me. He gave me enough time and space to back out, but I didn't. I kissed him back. I was so drunk that I didn't realize anything till the next morning. I woke up with a terrible hangover the next morning. It took me some time to realize what had happened last night. My kiss with George came back to memory, and I instantly thought, fuck, what had I done? I went out of the bedroom and found my husband at the kitchen counter. He was quite calmer than yesterday. He asked me where I was last night. I told him that I went out with my friends. He nodded to that and then said sorry for our fight that happened the previous day. He told me that he'll give me as much time as I want and there's no hurry to have a baby. He just couldn't wait to grow our family. I was instantly consumed by the guilt of what I had done last night. I kissed another man when my husband was dreaming of growing our family together. It was just a kiss, but still. It was a mistake that I deeply regretted, but there was no going back now. I knew I had made a grave error in judgment, and the regret consumed me. I wanted to come clean and tell my husband, but I was too scared of his reaction. I was terrified that he might find out about my mistake and leave me. I knew him. He wasn't the type of man who would let something like this slide. I saw text messages from George when I went to my bedroom. There were texts from him the previous night asking me if I had reached home safe. There were also texts about how he really enjoyed our kiss and would like to see me again. I immediately blocked him. The guilt of not being honest with my husband weighed heavily on me every day. I loved my husband, and I knew that if he found out the truth, it would break his heart. But still, I couldn't bring myself to tell him what had happened between George and me. Every night I lay awake in bed, motionless, reliving the moment I made my mistake. The guilt and fear were heavy like a physical weight, crushing my chest. It had been weeks since that day, but I still didn't have the courage to tell my husband what I had done. My throat seemed to close up every time I tried to form the words. So I decided to keep it a secret. I tried to act normal in front of my husband for the next few weeks. But every time he touched me, every time he kissed me, I felt like a fraud. I felt like I was deceiving him. I was living a lie. I was stuck in this limbo of guilt and fear until one day, George came to the seminar conducted by my department. My husband was the speaker in this event. As soon as I saw George, my heart sank. He knew what we had done, and he could easily reveal the truth if he wanted to. Fortunately for me, he didn't say anything about that night or even acknowledge me in any way. He kept his distance throughout his time on campus, never once giving me an indication that he remembered our secret kiss from months ago. I was relieved that he hadn't said anything about us, but at the same time, my guilt only intensified even further. It felt like a ticking time bomb waiting to go off at any moment. The day finally came when everything fell apart. It was a Monday morning and I was running late for work. I had a meeting with one of my colleagues and I was already 10 minutes late. I quickly grabbed my bag and rushed out of the house. I got in my car and started driving towards the university. As I was driving, I realized that I had left my phone at home. I panicked for a moment, but I decided to keep going. I knew that I would be late for my meeting, but I didn't want to turn back and risk being even later. My husband didn't have anything scheduled for the morning. He was going to come separately before his afternoon meeting. When I finally arrived at the university, I rushed to my meeting. It was a productive meeting, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. As soon as the meeting was over, I rushed to my office. When I opened the door, I saw my husband sitting at my desk. He had my phone in his hand, and he was scrolling through my messages. I froze. I knew at that moment that everything was about to come crashing down. My small mistake had finally caught up with me. My husband looked up at me with a look of betrayal in his eyes. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. He stood up and handed me my phone. "Why did you do it?" he asked me, his voice barely above a whisper. He had scrolled through my text messages with George. He read all our text messages where he flirted with me and I flirted back. He also mentioned the kiss in the texts. I had no words to say. I knew that there was no justification for what I had done. All I could do was hang my head in shame and wait for whatever was to come. My husband told me how he knew something was wrong when I started avoiding him in the last weeks. He told me that he had thought I was still upset about the baby thing, and that's why he was giving me space. "I never thought you'd betray me like this," he said to me. My husband didn't say anything else. He simply left my office, leaving me alone with my guilt and shame. I knew that I had lost his trust, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to earn it back. I sat at my desk for what felt like hours, numb with shock and regret. I had destroyed the one thing that mattered most to me, my marriage, and all because of a stupid kiss. I went home after some time. I needed to explain to my husband that it was a mistake and that I really loved him. My husband was sitting on the couch in the living room drinking his whiskey. I went to him to hold him and explain to him what had happened, but he rejected my touch and pushed me away. His eyes were cold and distant, and I could feel the anger radiating off of him. I knew that I had hurt him deeply, and there was nothing I could do to make it right. I felt an urgent need to explain everything to him. I told him how it was just a kiss, and that happened only because I was extremely drunk. He looked at me with so much anger but didn't say anything to me. He left the house after my confession. For the next few days, my husband barely spoke to me. It was like I didn't exist. I begged him for his forgiveness, but he refused to even look at me. I felt like a ghost wandering without any purpose through our home. Days turned into weeks with my husband and I living together but barely speaking. The air between us was thick with tension and unsaid words that hung like a loaded gun. I tried to reach out to him, but he kept pushing me away, refusing to even look at me. Everything I tried went in vain. I tried to hug him while he was sleeping, but he rejected my touch. For a while, I thought that we could work things out if I just kept putting efforts to earn his forgiveness. I thought that we could talk about what had happened and find a way to move forward, but it seemed like my husband had already made up his mind about what he wanted to do. One day, he came to me and told me that he wanted to talk about something. Hope blossomed as I sat there to listen to his words. I thought that maybe he has finally forgiven me and wants to make things all right again. He immediately crushed all the hope when he asked me to leave the house. He told me that he needed some space to think about things. He said it was hard for him to think with a clear mind when I'm in the same house as him. I was devastated. I couldn't believe that it had come to this. I didn't fight his decision. A small part of me hoped that maybe if we stayed away for a while, he would miss me and everything would get back to normal. I rented a small apartment in town and moved out of our home. It was really hard for me to leave the house. I didn't pack all of my stuff as I had hoped that I was going to come back and live here with him again. I moved to the apartment. It was a lonely existence there without my husband. I spent most of my days in tears, regretting everything that had happened. Or I would try to escape everything by getting lost in my work. I had requested work from home because I was too depressed to face the world. Work was a good distraction until I lost it too. One day, I got a call from the head of my department telling me that I was immediately terminated from my job. I was stunned. It felt like everything was falling apart in my life, my marriage, my home, and now my career. I had poured my heart and soul into my work, only to have it taken away from me because of a foolish mistake. I knew that it was my husband's doing. He had always been controlling, but I never thought he would go this far. I begged and pleaded with the head of my department to reconsider, but it was no use. The head of the department explained that my husband had called and demanded that they fire me from my job. He had told them that if they didn't remove me, he would resign, and the university couldn't have that. He had used his power and influence in the university to fire me. With no job and no home, I felt lost and helpless. I didn't know what to do or where to turn. The guilt and shame of my mistake were still heavy on my heart, and now I had to deal with the consequences of my husband's revenge too. Days turned into weeks, and I struggled to make ends meet. I didn't have much savings with me either. I applied for jobs everywhere, but no one would hire me. I felt like a failure in every aspect of my life. But then something unexpected happened. George reached out to me. He had mailed me since I had blocked his contact on my phone. It wasn't hard to get my mail since George was also a professor in the university where I used to work. He told me that he had heard about what had happened, and he wanted to help me. At first, I was hesitant. After all, he was the reason why I was in this mess in the first place. I was already jobless and had a husband who hated me. I didn't know what worse could happen to me, so I thought might as well meet George and see what happens. I met George at a small cafe near my apartment. He was dressed in a smart suit and had a charming smile on his face. He offered to buy me a coffee and we sat down at a small table by the window. He listened patiently as I poured out my heart to him. I told him everything that had happened, about my husband, my job, and my life falling apart. I felt a sense of relief as I spoke, like a weight was being lifted off my chest. This was the first time I was sharing this with someone. George sat quietly for a moment after I had finished. Then he leaned forward and took my hand. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I had no idea that things had gotten this bad for you." He looked into my eyes, and for a moment, I felt like I was drowning in them. There was a warmth and kindness in his gaze that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was almost comforting. "I want to help you," he said. His gesture was comforting. My husband hated me at the moment, but this man wanted to help me out. I told him that even though I appreciated his gesture, I couldn't accept it. I didn't want to make my husband more angry. Taking help from George would have done more harm than good. But as the days passed and my situation became even more desperate, I found myself thinking about George's offer more and more. I had no other options left, and he seemed genuine in his desire to help me. He had told me that he had connections in the academic world and that he could help me find a new job. My husband wasn't picking my calls. I had called him so many times to talk to him about my termination, but there was no response by his side. He was completely avoiding my existence, so I called George and told him that I had changed my mind. George helped me in finding a new job in another university. I had a hope that my life was finally getting back on track. Getting a job was the first step in making everything all right. He also helped me with my CV and cover letter. I told him that I was really grateful for his help. We weren't even friends for long, but still this guy was doing so much for me. I think that George was just trying to help me out because he also felt guilty for what had happened with me. We didn't flirt again or did anything inappropriate with each other. He was genuine in his approach to help me out in finding a job. I kept thinking about my husband and how I would have done anything to earn his forgiveness. I went to the university to talk to him, but he didn't even look at my direction and told me to leave. I was getting desperate to make him forgive me. Weeks went by and I settled into my new job. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I was slowly building a new life for myself. I tried calling my husband multiple times, but he never answered my calls or replied to my messages. I was still living alone in my small apartment with no one but George to confide in. Just as I had settled in my work, I was fired from that job as well. I had suspicion that this was my husband's doing as well. All the progress had gone to the bin, and I was back to square one. I couldn't control it anymore. I went to my husband's home and confronted him. I asked him what he wanted. He couldn't just keep taking away my work. He got livid and said that I should have thought about it before cheating on me. My husband had found out from his friends that I had gotten my new job because of George. He thought that I was having an affair with George. He told me that he hated me and that he wished he had never met me. He was in so much anger that I got scared. I tried to explain that there was nothing going on between me and George, and he was just helping me out to find a job. I swore to him but he didn't believe me. I got desperate and tried to justify the events of that night once again. I told him that I was really drunk and had way too many vodka shots. He laughed at me and told me that he cannot believe I was justifying my cheating to him. That night, I felt like I had lost my husband. The distance and coldness in his voice made it clear that he didn't want to do anything to me anymore. I had tears in my eyes when I was leaving that house. This time it seemed that I was never going to come back to this house. I kept applying for jobs at other places only to get rejected everywhere. I stopped talking to George as well. Seeing him brought back the guilt of that night when I kissed him, and it reminded me of everything that happened after that. One day when I was getting back to my apartment after another job interview, I saw an envelope waiting for me. My husband had sent me divorce papers. I couldn't stop the tears when I saw the papers. My marriage was ending because of me. It was only then that I realized that a single kiss had brought my entire world crashing down. I had never thought that a single mistake of mine could cost me my marriage and everything else. But here I was, alone, with no one to turn to for help. I didn't have many friends in town, and the ones that I had made were mutual friends with me and my husband. They were no way going to be with me and lose their friendship with him. I didn't even have my family, as they all had moved to another state because of my dad's transfer. The next few days seemed like an extremely long and painful nightmare. I went through every emotion possible, from sadness to anger, guilt to despair. I eventually stopped feeling anything at all and just knew that the only way forward was to slowly start rebuilding my life by myself. I took a deep breath and wiped away my tears. It was time to face reality and move on. I decided to sign the divorce papers. I couldn't fight for my marriage when my husband didn't want to. He had given up on me. I didn't even blame him. After all, it was me who had cheated on him. I signed the papers and went to my husband's house to give it to him. I also had to pack the rest of my stuff kept in his house. He opened the door and let me in. I gave him the papers and told him that I needed to get my stuff as well. He just nodded and made way for me to get to the bedroom. As I was going through my things, I came across a small note that my husband had left for me on our first anniversary. It read, "I love you more than anything in this world. You are my life, my soulmate, and my partner in crime. Happy anniversary, my love." The note made me cry even more. What had gone so wrong? How did we end up here? Where did all the love go? I packed as many things as I could manage and then left his house. I thought that maybe he would look at me with longing, just for a second, but nothing like that happened. There was only coldness in his eyes. After I came back to my apartment, I decided to take a break from everything and went for a walk. I walked aimlessly, lost in my thoughts. I didn't realize that I was about to get hit by a car speeding my way. A stranger had pulled me back from the road. That incident finally shook something inside me. I decided that I wasn't going to continue being a damsel in distress and was finally going to take control of my life. I left a message to my husband telling him that if he was sure about his decision, then I needed the divorce to be granted as soon as possible. He didn't reply back to me, but his lawyers contacted me and told me that the divorce proceedings won't take much time since it was an amicable divorce. They informed me of the terms mentioned in the divorce. My husband was giving me a fair share of his life earnings. I know I didn't deserve it, and neither did he want to share that with me. He was required by the law to do so. I told them to tell my husband that I didn't need his money or his assets. I needed the money even more after I lost my job, but I thought maybe this will make him forgive me. It didn't. The lawyers contacted me back, telling me that my husband had said this won't have any impact on his decision. Our divorce proceedings started soon and went as smoothly as possible. During the time we were required to be at the court, my husband didn't even look at my direction and only talked to his lawyers. His cold behavior used to hurt me so much. Our divorce was granted within 3 months by the court. I remember that I kept hope till the last moment. When the judge asked my husband if he was sure he wanted to move ahead with it, I waited for him to say no. But nothing like that happened. My husband has been relieved to lose all connections with me after the divorce, where on the other hand, I miss him every day. I wish that I could go back in time and rectify my mistake, but that is just wishful thinking. I have to spend my entire living with the guilt of destroying my relationship with my husband. After my divorce, I went out for lunch with a friend. She had called me and asked to meet since it has been very long. I wasn't very interested, but I still agreed. The friend was a mutual friend of mine and my husband. She told me that my husband has started dating again. As soon as the words slipped from her, she realized what she had told me and then completely changed the topic. I couldn't believe her words. I accepted that I had made a very big mistake, but I really loved my husband and didn't even think about moving on. And he moved on so easily. I asked more about him, but she didn't tell me anything after that. I have no one to blame for my situation but myself. If I hadn't made that foolish mistake, I would still be at home with my husband. I cannot change what has already happened, and now I'm just trying to adapt to the changes now. I knew I couldn't keep running into my husband or see him with another woman. I thought the best way to escape this pain is to get away from this town. Noon was going to give me a job here anyway, especially now when everyone knew about my divorce. I found a job in another town nearby. It was very less salary than what I used to get working with my husband, but I had no other option, so I accepted it and moved to that town. My presence didn't matter to anyone in this town either way. I'm just trying to get by each day at the moment. Some days it feels too difficult. I'm thinking of saving some money and joining therapy sessions. Maybe that would help with the guilt I carry inside me. Please let me know what you guys think. Thank you for reading my story so far. It felt good to share this with all you people here on Reddit. Update. For everyone asking me how I am doing now, thank you for asking. If I'm being honest, I don't know if I'm okay or not. It's still hard to process everything that has happened, but I just try to not think about it too much. Every time I think about the last few months, I have a breakdown. I'm just hoping it gets better with time. And for the comments which asked if either me or my husband tried to contact each other after the divorce, I did try to reach him, but he has blocked my number and on other social media platforms. I have mailed him telling him that I'm sorry, and I hoped that he would talk to me again. But like I expected, there has been no reply from him. Update. It has been more than a year since my last update. Everything has changed quite a lot since then. I thought that I was finally moving on with life. My breakdowns had decreased. I was going to therapy sessions as well. I haven't been fired from my job, which was as good as it could get. In the last year, I had tried to contact my ex-husband on multiple occasions. He hadn't talked to me even once. I wished him on his birthday via mail. The day of our anniversary was really hard for me. I couldn't help but reach him out. He never responded to any of my mails. I was still blocked on his phone. I knew he was dating someone, as my friend told me. I thought he was able to forgive me by now, and will at least talk to me. It would have been enough for me if just talked to me, but nothing. I had finally left all hopes and was trying to move on with my life as well. Just as I was trying to move forward, I was brought 4 steps backward. Last month, I had to go to the town where my husband lives for some document verification purposes. I needed his signature on some documents. I tried to reach him through email about this, but he didn't reply. I thought of going there by myself. Maybe a small part of me was just looking for some excuse to see him again. I was really anxious about meeting him after such a long time. I went to his house and rang the doorbell. I didn't know what to expect, but I surely didn't expect what I saw. A woman opened the door. She was quite young. She was also prettier than me. I knew that he was dating someone shortly after divorce, so I should have gone prepared. However, I wasn't prepared to see that woman pregnant. Her belly was showing clearly. She must have been around 5 months pregnant. It hurted me a lot to see another woman in his house pregnant with his child. I immediately got the thoughts as to how it should have been me having his child. We had a fight about having a baby when I went out that night with George. Guilt hit me hard as I stood there. I started getting thoughts as to how we wouldn't have gone this apart if we had a child to connect us with each other. I tried to compose myself. I told myself that I couldn't cry in my ex's house in front of the woman pregnant with his child. I told that woman who I was and that I needed his signature. She recognized me and told me that he's out and that to leave the paper with her. She'll courier them to me. She was kicking me out from the house, which used to be mine earlier. I nodded and gave her my address. I left that house with tears in my eyes and then came back to my apartment. I started having breakdowns again after that day. I started getting dreams about him with that woman and their child. I scheduled a session with my therapist, but even that didn't help. I have realized that I cannot escape this guilt and regret. It will always accompany me. I'm sharing this here because it feels to share my story without having someone judging me. If any of you know something to do which will make this easier, please share with me. I'm willing to try anything at this point. You know, I have only seen or heard about cheating ex-wives who later tried to come back in the name of fixing things and in the name of love on TV. I had thought those who allowed their cheating ex-wives back into their lives were fools or naive, not knowing that one day I'll be facing the same thing those men are facing out there. Mine was worse because she tried coming back with a baby that was not mine. The audacity. Women are evil and very manipulative species. They use the fact that you love them even after the breakup, you still loved them, and use that to their favor. I still can't believe that I once found myself in the same situation. I almost got trapped with a child that was not mine. If I didn't get a wake-up call and took matters into my own hands, I would have been a father to another man's child. If there is someone who once found himself in the same situation as mine, how did you deal with this kind of face-a-day? Let me tell you about my ordeal. So I, M44, married this humble, down-to-earth, and loving wife. Her name was Faith, F34. I loved her so much, there was nothing I didn't and wouldn't do for her, but she took all that for granted. Faith and I first met at the year-end party at work that was hosted by my boss 6 years ago. Her beauty caught my heart. Her humbleness and how she carried herself made me love her. When I first saw her, she was with some of my female colleagues. I didn't know how she knew my colleagues, but I later found out that she was the supervisor's little sister. I was working at an insurance company, name withheld due to personal reasons, in Richards Bay as a financial advisor. Let me first tell you a bit more about myself so it would be easy to understand my story. I was born and raised in the village of Richards Bay in KwaZulu-Natal. I am the person who they call a farm Julia in the suburbs or in the city. I was raised in a big family by very strict parents when it comes to our culture. My father used to say that if one of his children reached the age of 30 and they have not found a wife for himself who will bear him grandchildren and grow our household, he would personally look or arrange a marriage for that son, because it would have shown that the son was either a coward or gay. So I was under a lot of pressure because I was the third born in my father's male children out of 5 and 4 girls. I don't know and don't understand who came with the rule that stated all the men who live in villages must have many children or have 2 wives to grow the family's surname. My 2 older brothers were married around the village. It was easy for them because they got married to their childhood girlfriends. And I, on the other hand, sighed. I didn't know if I was the problem or I had a problem because I was not a person who was interested in courting ladies. The only thing I was obsessed about were my books, so my brothers would sometimes call me gay, because even if I came across a very beautiful lady in our village, I wouldn't have the courage to approach her. I was scared of rejection and thought that I was not their type of man they wanted because I was a bookworm. So one day my father came home and called a meeting with his sons. I thought it was something serious that concerned a family or his health. Mind you, at the time I was in the middle of my exams, I took a distance learning course at UNISA, University of South Africa. I did accounting and business management, which was a course I chose because I loved accounting and managing businesses. It was a 3-year course, and I was on my second, going to a 3rd year in a few months. Okay, so father called us to a big house. We call it a family house. We made sure to always leave everything, no matter how busy we were, and comply with father's summons. We had to respect his requests. So when we had all gathered, father started telling us about the issues we were facing at home. What surprised me was that I was also in the issues. When I had just reached 30 years, my father announced that he had found me a wife. He found me a wife while I was in the middle of my exams. That made me mad because it somehow showed that my father didn't care about my goals and education. Instead, he wanted me to find a wife that I would impregnate so she can bear him grandchildren. I didn't argue with him after his announcement because I knew that if I did, I would be in hot waters. You know, when parents think they know everything and know what's best for everyone is what my father was doing. He also announced that I would have to meet the girl before he takes the next step. I didn't agree with him because I was in the middle of my exams, so I didn't need any destruction. But he threatened to disown me if I went against his word, so I had no choice but to obey. He was the head of the family after all. I missed my mother so much because she was able to soften her husband's hard heart. Our mother passed away when I had just turned 25. It was the hardest time of our lives. I had thought my parents were soulmates and no one would get in between them. But life and the universe had other plans. Well, more like my extended family elders had other plans for their relationship. So as most people know that in most villages, especially African villages, they perform witchcraft and all those weird things. You survive if you have a very strong ancestor and believe in them along with God. It's more like survival of the fittest. So the extended family elders once called my father and told him that he needed a second wife because one woman wouldn't be able to handle a big household all alone, so she needed a helper. Time went by and the second wife came and she was introduced to us. She had only one child who passed away when he turned 15. The reason for the course of his passing was not clear, but when they went to a traditional healer, the healer told them that the child had passed on because of his mother's sins. The second wife started accusing our mother of witchcraft, saying she had killed her child. The accusation and jealousy went on until my mother started getting sick. She didn't know what was going on with her because she had suddenly got sick. The sickness kept getting worse, so my brothers and I went to the healer again and tried to get help for our mother. We were told that my father had allowed a snake into our home, so since she lost a child because of her doings, instead of repenting, she got bitter and she was on a mission to destroy or kill everything that had any relation with our mother. 3 months later, our mother passed on in her sleep. It was not believable because she had started looking better, but she was fooling us. Her passing made father blame himself for our mother's passing. He became cold-hearted and more strict after the second wife got arrested. My elder brothers didn't believe that our mother had just died in her sleep, so they went to the mortuary authorities and requested for a post-mortem to find her actual course of death. When the results came back, we found out that she was poisoned. So my brothers came back with police officers and the wife was arrested. I have never been so infuriated like that in my life. I was angry and wanted the second wife's blood. Jail was going to be too soft for her. She deserved a serious punishment. A few days later, my father organized a meeting with this girl. Actually, he came home with this girl, the one he said he had found for me. He introduced her as Nozipo, meaning gift. The girl was beautiful, I won't lie, but she looked too young and too forward for me. I didn't want to disappoint my father or get on his bad side, so I went with the flow. The girl and I started talking, spending time together as my father had suggested. I told the girl that whatever that was happening between us, she shouldn't be comfortable because I was doing this for my father to get off my back. Me agreeing to the nonsense didn't mean I loved her and would ever love her. Forward and stupid girls who had no ambition and goals were not the type of girls I would want in my life. So Nosifo, gift, was not the cup of tea I would drink if it was up to me. But we have to respect our elders' orders and requests, right? We hung out a couple of times. She would sometimes see that I was not interested in whatever she was saying. She bored me to the core. We developed a pretend relationship because the way my father wanted grandchildren, it's like he was dying, so he didn't want to die before seeing all his children's kids. Nosifo and I slept together for obvious reasons. So during our planned relationship, she kept complaining that I was a boring boyfriend. I was too serious for her. How would you be a fun boyfriend to someone you didn't even love? She told me that she liked guys who buy at least a slab of chocolate just to make a girl happy, or take her out even if it's going to KFC, and that she wanted to feel special like those girls who live in the city. I didn't understand why she was telling me this. Besides, she was from the rural areas, so I wondered how she knew such things. I then figured that it may be social media influence. So as we were trying for a child his father wanted, nothing was happening. I then went to a doctor to check what was going on because a lot was happening to me. 1. The girl had to work so hard for my shaft to wake up. 2. If I wanted to get intimate with her, I first had to watch XX videos. And lastly, our intimate session did not last even 10 minutes. It was boring. So I tried to bribe her to break up with me and go back home, but she told my father and the old man was not impressed. Weeks after I had gone to the doctor, I heard rumors that the girl was pregnant, and people from the village believed that the child was mine because she had been seen with me a lot. I ignored all the rumors, and my father took it upon himself to go and pay damages to the girl's family, since I had slept with her and made her pregnant. Months later, the child was born. She had moved to our home because father had paid dowry for her. When the child turned 3 months old, he started getting sick. So in our culture, if a child gets sick randomly, it's issues related to ancestors. When the child is sick, an elder or the head of the family has to burn an incense to speak or appease the ancestors and ask them to stop making the child sick. My father tried burning incense several times, but it didn't budge, which raised an eyebrow. After my father was about to give up, the incense got burnt, but not the way it was supposed to. The smoke was too small, and only a small portion of an incense was burning. The child kept getting sick, and the sickness got worse. I was also worried about the child, so I suggested that we go to a traditional healer to consult. Nosifo started throwing fits, saying she doesn't believe in traditional healers, so we can't take her child there. Okay? Things kept getting worse with a child up until my father called the traditional healer at home, and the traditional healer kept saying the child has to be reunited with his true ancestors, or else he would not get better. We didn't understand at first because we had thought the child was mine. Even though the resemblance was not there, I gave Nosifo the benefit of the doubt for my father's sake. Weeks passed, and some man came home and introduced himself as Brandon, and he was looking for Nosifo. The guy was also from our village, so I didn't understand why Nosifo would just burst if the guy came in peace. The guy narrated his story and told us that he was there to get his child so he can do better by him. I got confused because I had thought the child was mine since I didn't go back to the doctor for the results. He told us that he knew that the child was sick and needed his true family and to be united with his true ancestors, so he was there to take his child. Nosifo got furious to a point that she then told the guy that she kept the baby away from him because he was poor and he wouldn't be able to take care of the child since he was just a herd boy. I got really mad to the point that I dragged Nosifo outside and told her to go because if I were to see her, I was going to do something that would land me in jail. My father was shocked and disappointed because he had trusted the girl. I didn't believe the girl the audacity to tell the poor guy that she agreed to become my fiancée and the mother of my children was because we were affording and had cows, so the child was not going to suffer. Meaning, she had fooled my father to secure the bag. Gold diggers. You know, in rural areas, if you have livestock, you are considered as a rich man or rich family. So at home we had that, and it came as a shock to my father that the girl he liked for me and was ready to pay for her bridal price was a scammer. What she did was a scam, but I knew it the way she was carrying herself. She was not the saint my father thought she was. So my father, along with my uncles, went back to her home to ask back the damage and dowry money because the girl they had thought was a good girl for me turned out to be a gold digger and ended up putting an innocent child's life in jeopardy just because she wanted to secure the bag. Since I kept my focus on books as I was going to graduate later that year, then I would move to the city and look for a job. After some time I graduated, I wished my mother was there, but then again the universe and God had spoken, but at least father was there, and he was the proudest father. A few months later, I found a job at an insurance company. At that time, I was going to be just an intern, which was a great stepping stone for me because here in South Africa, you stay at home for years looking for a job with your qualifications, and most of the time you need connections to get a job. So I thanked God and my ancestors for opening doors for me a few months after I had graduated. A year later, I was given a permanent position, and I couldn't be happier. I loved my job very much. That time, things were going very well on my side. Even at home, father had stopped pestering me about getting a wife. With the stipend I got from being an intern, I managed to get myself a small apartment because traveling from the city to the villages every day was not going to work since it was too far. Time went by and we were going to close for the festive season holidays. So the CEO of the company had hosted an annual year-end closing party for the staff. The previous year I didn't attend it because I had gone home early. One of my brothers had hosted a ceremony. The party went well, it had a lot of vibe, but my eyes were glued to this one lady. The man who was my supervisor when I was an intern came to where I was and introduced her as Faith, his sister. Faith was a very beautiful woman. No scratch that, she was gorgeous, and the goddess. She had a very nice body, always smiling, shy and humble. Well, I thought she was humble. Her brother left us and we started talking. She was smart too. She had brains and big dreams. That's what I loved most about her, a woman with vision and ambition. She was a lady of class. You would see the way she was carrying herself, the things she wore. She respected and loved herself. So that night we chatted. I was having fun with her up until we heard the CEO delivering his appreciation speech. That was when we realized that the time had flown and we had to go our separate ways. I didn't want to look forward and ask for her number. I mean, as much as she had all the qualities I needed and wanted in a woman, but I couldn't bring myself to ask for her number. Well, more especially after what I had done, even though I didn't love her or caught my heart like how Faith did. But she still took me for a fool, which made me not fully trust women. Instead, she asked for mine, saying we should hang out since she didn't have friends and she liked my company. I gave it to her, not knowing that I was setting myself on a trap, but what would have I done? A week later, she texted me and asked where I was. She was bored. Unfortunately, I was home with my family because we had all agreed that, as much as some of us were working in the city, we had to make sure that during December holidays or any holidays, we would spend them home as a family. So I couldn't leave my family and attend to Faith's needs. We then decided to just chat on WhatsApp. From then, we started talking, from chatting on WhatsApp to calling each other every morning and every night. We became good friends. When I went back to the city, we started going out, in the name of getting to know each other. She then introduced me to different restaurants that I didn't know about in the city. I mean, the only thing I came to the city for was work, so I didn't know much about any fancy restaurants except McDonald's or KFC and retail stores where I bought groceries. Faith loved trying new things. She was adventurous, whereas I was just a village who was obsessed with books and numbers. She taught me a lot that I didn't know about, introduced me to new things like going out, not to clubs, but visiting different places that had fun activities like hiking, mountain climbing, etc. We became very good friends. I appreciated every time I had spent with her. She taught me a lot that I didn't know about. Our friendship was really amazing. It went on until the day she came to my apartment. She had complained of being bored. She was still living with her parents. She was working as a travel agent at Richards Bay Airport, which explained why she was an adventurous person. Okay, so she came to my apartment, we just chilled, talked about random things, played board games until we decided to just watch something on Showmax. She loved watching reality shows like The Real Housewives. She was a huge fan of the Housewives. She would even tell me the kind of husband she would want to spend her life with. Her dream was to be a housewife and be taken care of by her husband. From watching her reality shows, I opted to change to Netflix. She chose romantic comedy movies, which we didn't even finish because we were busy talking during the movie. She surprised me when she kissed me and told me that she had always wanted to taste my lips. Mind you, I had also been controlling myself every time when I was with her. She was a temptation. So when she kissed me, my heart started having palpitations. I decided to go with the flow. I was happy that I had finally kissed the person I had been fantasizing about. She had soft and welcoming lips. When things were about to escalate, I stopped it before we got too far. Time went by. We became what we call friends with benefits. We would satisfy each other whenever we could up. I don't know if I was the one or she was the one who caught feelings, but I believe I was. I couldn't continue with the no strings attached or friends with benefits thing, so I told her what I felt. And to my surprise, she said that she felt the same way. I had come to terms that not all women were the same. The time I had spent with Faith made me trust her. Not fully, but I did trust her. I was a free-spirited person when I was with her. I felt alive, you know. It's like she was a missing part in my life. She was that missing chapter in a book. Since both of us had developed strong feelings for each other, our relationship got promoted from being friends to friends, with benefits to an actual couple's relationships. Our relationship was a bliss. We supported and loved each other. After 2 months of dating, she told her brother, my supervisor, about us because she didn't want any awkward vibes between us when he found out. Her words, not mine. The brother obviously gave me a tough time, but eventually accepted the relationship. Time passed, and I told my father that I had found a woman and I saw a future with her. Little did I know that I was just fooling myself. My father was happy at the fact that I had finally found myself a woman after the one he had found for me, who turned out to be a gold digger. So during Easter holidays, I had invited Faith to meet my family, which she gladly accepted. I was somehow nervous about how she would view my background. Not my home, but the village, because she was a girl from the suburbs. When she came home, I first introduced her to my brothers and sisters. I loved the fact that as much as she grew up in the suburbs, she knew how to dress as a respectful woman. She respected occasions and made sure to wear respectfully. My brothers didn't trust her. I understood their fears, but they had no choice but to accept her as the woman in my life. I mean, father wanted grandchildren from all his children, right? So I had found the right person for that, but we were going to adopt since the doctor said I was infertile. 6 months passed. I asked my father to gather the uncles because I wanted them to represent me to the Smith family. In our culture, if you want to take a woman, you have to pay and introduce yourself to the family of your woman. Luckily, they were not too much of suburb people, as Faith's mother was a Zulu woman who knew and respected tradition, but she got married to a Smith family, then she moved to the suburbs. My father and the uncles, along with my 2 elder brothers, went to the Smith family to negotiate on my behalf and introduce myself to my in-laws. Faith's father knew a little about the Zulu tradition, so he had asked Faith's uncles from her mother's side of the family to help him during the negotiations. One thing I knew was that I couldn't wait for my wife. She showed me all the qualities of a good wife. I had hoped that she would be different from the one my father had chosen for me. Another couple of months passed. Everything that needed to be done traditionally was sorted. The only thing that had left was the white wedding. I couldn't be happier. You know, I was with the woman who matched all the qualities I needed in a woman. She made me happy and complete as a man. I just don't understand what has gone wrong. I worked very hard at work, took extra shifts so that I could raise enough money for our wedding and our surprise honeymoon. I had planned to take her to Belito for our honeymoon. I had heard that Belito was a great holiday place, especially for newlyweds. So I made sure to put every cent I got in savings because I didn't want her to contribute a huge portion of money to our wedding. I mean, I was her man, right? So it was my right and responsibility to provide for her. Time went on very fast to a point that our wedding day was approaching. I was happy. We were happy because the day we had been waiting for had finally come. So when the day came, our wedding was a success. Our families were united and happy, as us. Later that day, we decided to rest. We were going to drive to the surprise location. Everything was a success. We had so much fun on our honeymoon. A few nights after our honeymoon, she wanted us to have a talk about expanding our family and having kids. Mind you, I had forgotten to tell her about my infertility problem, and as much as she was my wife, I was not comfortable to share such a sensitive thing about me with her. I was scared that she would leave me and find a guy who was fertile and would be able to impregnate her. Was I wrong to keep that as a secret? Weeks turned to months, and Faith was really persistent about wanting to have her own family. She kept reminding me every time it was like she was obsessed with having a child. I don't know if she was obsessed with having a child with me, or she just wanted a child that would call her mom. Unfortunately, I couldn't grant her wishes and give her what she wanted. There was this day when she came back from work. Chuckles. I couldn't believe what she did or said. So she came back from work. That day I was not working, I had got a day off. She told me that she had removed her contraceptive preventing implant. Mind you, I didn't even know that she got an implant. So she removed her implant so that it would be easy to fall pregnant, and her doctor had told her that she was very much fertile. So in order for her to fall pregnant fast, she had to take some supplements and check her ovulation dates, which would be a great time to try for a child since her eggs would be active. I couldn't believe my ears. I told her that I didn't want any children, at least not at that time. I didn't give her any reason why I didn't want or was not ready for any children. I know it was wrong and selfish of me, but I couldn't risk losing the only woman I had ever loved, especially not when she had so much eagerness and obsession in having a child. What she told me really shocked me because I was not expecting it. So one day she asked why I was not showing any interest in starting or expanding our own family. I know that time I had a chance to come clean, but I was too ashamed, so I lied and told her that I was just not interested and I wanted to focus on my career. A week later, she then suggested that she was resigning or retiring from her work because she needed to focus on building her family and be a wife, which meant she wanted or expected me to provide for her with everything while she was a housewife. I just don't understand women sometimes, but I shouldn't have been surprised because she was influenced by those reality shows she was watching. And she once told me that her wish was to find a man who would provide for her so she won't have to work, but be a housewife. A year passed and things were no longer the same at my house. My wife had started changing on me. Well, she had started changing when I didn't allow her to quit her job since I was just a financial advisor, which was not a job that paid fortunes. My salary wouldn't even cover half of what she needed as a woman. Another thing, she had started getting impatient about getting pregnant. She would get angry at me whenever I refused her sex. She was not always in the house and had started traveling a lot, saying it was work-related. My conscience couldn't allow me to believe what she had told me. My mind was telling me that she was cheating. All those thoughts were running wild in my head to a point that confronted her and she denied my allegations. I developed trust issues, and what Nosifo had once put me through came back. We had fights about that because she had started going out a lot, saying she was going to her parents' house, and she would be sleeping over or going to work. I ignored all that because I had thought that she wouldn't lie about going to her parents' house and work, plus to me, she didn't appear as the person who would just be unfaithful. She was my innocent angel, not knowing that she was actually a devil's agent hiding under a white innocent cloth. Her visiting my parents became a trap song because I had somehow believed it and went with the rhymes and lyrics. So, one weekend I decided to go and see her parents, as my in-laws, of course, thinking maybe I would see my wife. I had missed spending time with her, so I was going to check up on the rents, then come back with her. I mean, I didn't marry her to spend more time with her parents, right? When I got there, I didn't see her, so I told her mom that I had come to fetch my wife since I missed her and I wanted to spend my weekend with her. I agree. I had somehow neglected her because she had changed to an obsessed person who wanted a child so bad. And ever since, I didn't allow her to be a housewife. She was going out a lot. So, her mother told me that she had last seen her 2 months ago. That raised an eyebrow because whenever she was leaving, she would say she was going to her parents' house, and that was happening every weekend. I asked her about her lies when she came back, and the things she said to me were not what I had expected from her. She told me in the face that I was no longer satisfying her, so she got satisfaction outside our marriage. Which was not the worst thing she said, because her last words were that she had been tolerating me for too long. We had been trying for over a year for a baby, but she was not falling pregnant. She even told me that I was less of a man and she wanted a divorce. I got furious and I ended up slapping her. Luckily, we didn't get married under community property, but I tried fighting for her, but her mind was made up and she even threatened to open a restraining order for me. I love this woman too much. I still had plans for our marriage, very big plans, but she decided to just throw herself in someone else's bed just because she was not getting pregnant, and I was no longer satisfying her. I won't lie, even today when I think about her, I become enraged. She moved out of our marital home. My father had given us land as our wedding gift to build my house, where I would be staying with my wife and kids, so I did as he had said. She was a gone girl. Father called a meeting between two families, mine and Faith's, to try and solve the issue that we were facing. Faith didn't show up at that meeting, so the two families looked at me as a man who couldn't control his house and was controlled by a woman. 2 weeks later, I saw her with a man in some restaurant. They were cozy, and even a small child would see that those people were in a relationship. So I granted her a divorce. At least I didn't lose anything to her. I couldn't fight for something that was not going anywhere. The ship had sunk, so it was time to move on and restart my life. Since then, I vowed to never fall in love again. The person I had thought had the qualities of a good woman showed me that no woman is perfect. They are all evil and manipulative. She made me believe that she loved me, but she chose someone else over me just because she couldn't get pregnant. So see that God works in mysterious ways. A year and a couple of months later, she came back home. She was not alone, but with a small child. The thing she said was, she came to introduce me to my child. She had fallen pregnant before she got into a relationship with the man I once saw her with, and worse things happened. She found out that the man was married and was not willing to leave his wife for her. I just told her that she should go back to that man and introduce the baby to him because the baby looked nothing like me or any of my family members. When she refused to go, I called her parents and brother and asked them to come and fetch her. Then I told her that there was no way the baby was mine because I was infertile. Then I showed her the papers from the doctor. She couldn't believe it, so I asked her to never contact me again or set foot in my house because I would murder her if I ever see her again. That day I decided to be calm and not do the unthinkable to her. Later on, her parents and brother came and fetched her. I was so disappointed and angry at myself for investing all my love to someone who would do the same thing the person I didn't even love once did to me. Fear woman, how do you think I should have dealt with the situation? I need some advice.